Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup. I'm your humble host, Steve. That's talent on loan from Kolob. Every week, my crew and I, we ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. So thanks so much for joining us to discuss the contemporary events in Mormonism. It's May 12th, 2024, and we've got a great episode for you. Now, this episode is a blast from the past, so we're not going to be covering contemporary news articles this week, but it's with one of my favorite people of all time, and that's Rene Steelman from the She Became Visible channel. I'm such a big fan of Rene. She's been on my program. I've been on hers, and this episode never aired on the Mormon News Roundup, but it did air on our Patreon channel. We have a number of special features over there at our Patreon channel. If you come on over and make a small donation, you will unlock all of these episodes here, which you can watch with early access and no ads. And this episode has been sitting there for quite some time, and we are now going to release it onto the Mormon News Roundup channel. So I really hope that you enjoy this conversation that I have with She Became Visible and Rene Steelman. And remember, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing.
Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson. You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
This roundup. So let me bring D-Vase into the audience. Hello.
How's it going, Rene? How's it going?
I am so impressed. And you are sneaky because I don't think anybody really knows about your musical talents. And I think one of these days we should do a full podcast with you at the piano, and I'll just be that interview person while you serenade us with some amazing tunes.
Well, you have to use the word musical talent there with a grain of salt. We'll just put it that way. But do you like my background, by the way, with my background for this episode?
Well, as a matter of fact, I kind of do love your background, and I believe it should be your background for all of your Mormon News Roundup. So we can talk about that.
All right, we'll work on that.
Okay.
I will take that to my my foundation. You know, the Mormon News Roundup. We have a foundation. I'll have to run that past them. Actually, we don't. But yeah, well, sorry,
we're don't.
We're just a C-list podcast. That's for sure. I am a little bit nervous though about coming on to She Became Visible because I do have an extra Y chromosome that is doing me absolutely no good in this situation.
Absolutely not. But you know what? I have branched out. I have decided that to be a true feminist, I have to include men in my podcasts. So that's what I've decided to do. And I'm really excited. I've had some great guests on, and I'm excited to have you on. And unfortunately for you, it's not going to be your last. So get ready.
Yeah, you come on the Mormon News Roundup before, and we're going to have you on definitely again. I'm a huge fan of your podcast. I never miss an episode. I watch every single one of them. And so it's a real thrill to be on it. And what are we doing this episode here, Rene?
We are going to highlight the top 10 news events for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 2023. And I don't know how you got it down to 10. Seriously.
Yeah, there's so many choices here. And, I'm putting this as what I believe is the top 10. Now, maybe you have some pushback. Maybe you think they're in the wrong order. Maybe you think that maybe I left one off. And I want to hear your feedback from this because I know you follow the space pretty carefully. So, I mean, you're a mover and shaker in the Mormon community. So that's what I'm looking for, some feedback. Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? And for those of you who are, out there in YouTube, in Apple Podcasts, let us know your thoughts. What were the most important Mormon news events of the year? That's what we're trying to capture here today. I do have a little slideshow that goes along with this, Rene.
We are ready to go. And I just have to say, I don't think that the 10 that you have listed here today can be ranked in any kind of order, because there isn't like this one was more horrendous than this one. It was just a constant barrage of news events. And I don't think there really is. I don't think it's possible to do a ranking. So I think what you've done is perfect.
Yeah, it's definitely a subjective analysis for sure. Now, we release all of our episodes, the Mormon News Roundup. We release all of our episodes live on every Sunday night. We do a weekly Mormon News Roundup where we cover the latest events in Mormondom. And that's on 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And on Monday nights at 9:30 p.m., we also cover the Mormon movie reviews, which is where we review an old LDS movie cinematic classic or some of the new fare as well. So if you join us over there on YouTube, you can certainly interact with us. So let's talk about our criteria here. Where I'm going to try to rank these, Rene, from the least important. So the first article that I have is the least important, and then we're going to go to the most important. It's not necessarily which articles are the most interesting, but which ones have the greatest scope. That is the most eyes, and that's both with members and non-members. Really, I'm looking for the stories that had the biggest impact, the stories that went viral.
That's really good, because I think it's really important to realize that in the Mormon world, if you have an association of some kind with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a lot of these events will mean more to you than people who are, I'll say, outside the bubble. And I mean really outside the bubble. For example, I know that one of the items on our list is the Ruby Frankie case. And I just attended a retreat here in Arizona where people had flown in from all over the world. And there were some women here that had flown in from Pennsylvania. And I said, have you heard about the Ruby Frankie case? And they said, no, we don't know what you're talking about. And I also asked them about Tim Ballard. They didn't have any. So it really is a little bit exclusive, but then there are other things that have made, like you say, that have gone viral. So I just think that each one of them needs to be highlighted. And I'm so glad that you're doing this.
Absolutely. Let me give you one other caveat here, and it's because LDS and church membership is so small in proportion to the world's population. The most important Mormon news articles of 2023, whoops, a little typo there, will generally impact members of other faiths or non-religious more than Latter-day Saints themselves, because there's only about 4 million active Latter-day Saints in the entire world. So if you're talking about scope, if you're talking about impact, the articles that are going to go viral are the ones that impact the entire world. And there's a lot more non-Mormons in the world than there are Mormons, right?
Exactly. And I do think, especially right now with election time coming up, there are a lot of things that are going to fall very, very easily into some of the political events that are coming up that will, the Mormonism impact is going to follow a path very easily. So 2024 is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot on tap here. One other caveat here for you, Rene, and it's because the LDS church membership is so large in proportion to the total Mormon-related entities, FLDS, Community of Christ, Apostolic Brethren. The most important Mormon news articles of this year will generally focus on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints more than other branches of the Restoration,
Right.
because, the Brighamite branch is the biggest, right?
Exactly. And I do think that's the one that is more well-known throughout the world. So.
Yeah, when most people think of Mormons, they think of the Brighamite branch. So without further ado, unless there's any other questions, are we ready for the top 10?
Let's go. Let's do it.
Okay, call me a Mormon one more time. Okay, we're gonna call him a Mormon a couple more times just to make sure it sticks. Okay, so my number 10 article this year, and this is perhaps the most controversial for me as to whether this is the number 10, is the church's real estate portfolio. We know that the church, from the Truth and Transparency Foundation, from Ryan McKnight, from Ethan Dodge, back in 2022, they uncovered the fact, they documented it, that the LDS Church has the most valuable private real estate portfolio in the United States by valuation. And then the church is probably the second biggest landowner in the United States by total acreage owned, only second to the Emerson family, who owns a number of timber reserves in the Northwest. So they're a huge real estate kingpin, and they've done a lot in this year in 2023, and we're only going to highlight a few of them. But for me, the church's real estate is the number 10 article this year.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think this is a perfect example of how trying to stay on top of the top 10 events that have happened in 2023. I just saw a little article yesterday, I think, about some property that was purchased in Washington State. And I don't know if it's current or if it's just a repeat of something that happened a few months ago. But it wasn't the warehouse; it was actual farmland that the church outbid Bill Gates for. So it's ongoing. You can't keep up with the things that are happening, and the real estate is, I think, scary because there's just this undercurrent of why.
It's very hard to keep track of all of the church's purchases because they do so using their shadowy organizations, the Farmland Reserve Inc., the Intellectual Reserve Inc., all of the different companies that the church has for their for-profit entities. We're not talking about chapels, temples, ecclesiastical buildings here. We're talking about the for-profit ventures. Trying to keep them all straight is really, really a challenge. And we're just going to highlight a couple of the church's biggest moves this year, which starting with number 1, it's the Kent Industrial Development, which sold last December December, it was at the end of the year, at the beginning of this year, it sold for $260 million. I mean, Amazon owned this property. The church took over the property. It's a huge warehouse with lots of different companies in it. And now all of those companies are sending the church rental payments instead of sending it to Jeff Bezos. So you can see who the church is sitting next to at the table. You have Jeff Bezos. You mentioned Bill Gates, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The church is a huge real estate kingpin.
Yeah, and I think the key word with this one is rental fee. That as you mentioned, from now on, there will be a rental fee that's sent in monthly, and that will flow into one of the other real estate purchases that you're going to be covering in a few minutes.
Yeah, the church loves to purchase properties and then not sell them back to other people, but loves to collect the rent in perpetuity for those properties so that the coffers will still be getting enriched. And this is a prime example of that. We also had in the kingdom. The Mormon Church bought Wembley Amazon warehouse, again, Amazon warehouse for 74 million pounds, which is about $100 million, via one of its charitable companies. And I'm going to use the word charitable here in quotation marks because these are generally for-profit ventures here. It was bought by a registered charity that manages the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints investments. So we're seeing major real estate purchases throughout the world. We're only just going to highlight a couple of them. But yeah, the church, it's got deep pockets, and what it chooses to spend its money on frequently is real estate.
Exactly. And I think too, it's very important to realize that there's a logical fallacy out there that I hear a lot of people use, which is, well, this is very common in the corporate world. This is what other corporations do. And you can see this in other corporations. You can see it in BlackRock and how they begin these side corporations that then make the purchases so that they can deny that they made the purchases, but we know that it's all tied back in. So just the fact that large corporations do these kind of real estate purchases, it's still questionable when a charitable religious organization, a church, does the same thing.
Yeah, now we covered, Rene, we covered every single one of these articles on the Mormon News Roundup. So we're just giving you a recap, but I know that you're in Arizona, and how far are you from this Queen Creek development, which was just announced a short time ago?
Yeah, this is what I was reflecting. This is about an hour away from where we're at. It's a brand new area, lots of young families moving into this area. It's actually maybe even a little bit farther, about an hour and a half. But yeah, this is kind of the new area that young families are able to move into that they can afford. And again, though, the church purchased this not to sell property to young families, but complete rental.
The church buys real estate. It's not there for the soup kitchens. It's not there for homeless shelters. It's there for-profit maximum income generation, which is what we're seeing with the Queen Creek of 235 units, I think that it was, $1 million homes, $2 million homes that are going to be for rent so that you will be paying the church in a long time of rent every single month. I imagine that the rents on these properties will be $5,000 a month, maybe even $10,000 a month. With 250 units, you can see how much income these type of things can generate.
Right. And totally uncontrollable, totally not something that you can claim ownership to, and something that is, I think, scary because it's not only in these kind of things, but personal real estate is also being purchased by large corporations, which is driving up the cost of housing, which is completely wiping out middle America. So I think it's scary.
Not just in Washington, not in the United Kingdom, not in Arizona. In Nebraska, the church went on a shopping spree just in the last 2 months, buying up 400,000 acres in Nebraska. And Mormon Church is now the top purchaser of land in Nebraska. And they're going to be the #1 private holder of real estate in Nebraska in a short period of time. It's all of these moves that are really, really big for those communities that are involved, because, you know, the church is generally tax exempt when it purchases these properties, although they do pay some taxes for the commercial ventures. But a lot of times, some of these will be tax exempt, which means that's going to drive up the not only, like you said, the property values in the area, but the amount of taxes that the rest of the community has to pay to make up for that lost income because the church is tax exempt. That causes a significant turmoil in the community, and these moves in Nebraska are not well received.
Absolutely. When you're talking about the things that our tax dollars are used for, fire department, police department, roads, other things like that, and then to have a property that's tax exempt, it'll be interesting to see how a nonprofit tax exempt corporation gets away with owning personal livability housing projects.
Supposedly, they are going to be paying on some of these commercial real estate ventures that the church is going to be paying the normal property taxes. But it's kind of a gray area because it is a religious organization. It said in Wembley, for instance, that it was a charitable organization. So the taxes are a little bit in doubt. And what we saw also in another case in England is the church bought a big commercial property. And then what they did is it's kind of a inside of that property, they moved one Mormon congregation into the commercial property on Sundays. And the rumor on the street is that they did that so that the entire property would be shielded from tax consequences. Because if you have a congregation inside of a huge complex, that's a religious complex, then you can write off the entire thing as potentially being tax exempt. So the church is really working the system here.
So instead of using a church building for a Sunday activity, they've now moved it into a commercial building,
right,
basically, so that they can claim, no, this is where our church meets.
Yes, this is an Alder Castle in England, right? So, and this is what I predict that you're going to see a lot more of that in the future of congregations. We've seen that the church is losing congregations, but they don't want to give up their commercial real estate portfolio. So I think what you're going to see, my prediction in the future is, especially a lot of these commercial ventures, they're not open on Sunday. They'll move the chapels into those commercial ventures in order to reduce the tax liability of the church. And it's not just that the church is buying a lot. The church is also selling a lot. The church owns a lot of land back from Missouri, from the time that the church owned land in Missouri. They're selling 1,800 acres of Mormon-owned land that's up for sale in Lee Summit. They're dumping land left, right, and center. They're buying land. They're just the entire summarization here, Rene, is that the church is a huge real estate kingpin, and it does. And when it starts moving, when it starts pushing those hundreds of millions of dollars around, it really affects the lives of the communities of the people who's involved.
Well, not only that, but wasn't that the chosen land? Isn't that the New Jerusalem? Isn't that where we're all supposed to be hiking back to someday? I mean, now where are we going to go? I guess we go to Nebraska, right?
Right. And that's the amusing thing is that Jackson County, that was in Clay County, which is where the Saints, after they were expelled from Jackson County, they formed Caldwell and Clay County, and they were specifically formed for the Latter-day Saint refugees. We're selling land in Missouri. We're buying it in Nebraska. There's a lot of stuff. It's very hard to keep track of it all because it's not all under one entity. The church makes their real estate arm has different incorporated entities. And so they make it so that it's hard to track the church's total valuation in real estate. That's why Ryan McKnight, Ethan Dodge, they spent so long establishing, I had them on the podcast, establishing how much the church owns. It's just huge. The leader of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is President Russell M. Nelson. And whatever he does, that's big news. Now, I just want to cover a couple of things that he did this year, which I think are noteworthy. Number one, the president of the church received the Gandhi King Mandela Peace Prize back in Morehouse College, which is a historically Black school. It honored President Nelson for building bridges of racial understanding. And this was presented to President Nelson by Reverend Lawrence Edward Carter Sr., the Dean of the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel. This was back in April. President Nelson didn't attend, but he was honored. And I just want to play one clip here, Rene, and get your reaction to it.
You may not know this, but in the 33 years that I've been practicing law, I have received numerous letters and emails from prestigious sounding societies breathlessly announcing that I have been chosen to win some kind of great award like Best Attorney in the Galaxy or something, and that if I will just ship them a large chunk of change, they will in return send me a very nice plaque or trophy or something that I can hang up on the wall so that when my clients come into the office, they can look up and see that and ooh and ah at what a fantastic attorney I am. Because you see, the clients don't know that the whole thing is a scam. In a completely unrelated story, the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel will be awarding President Russell M. Nelson of the LDS Church something called the Gandhi King Mandela Peace Prize on April 13th, 2023 for, quote, using his global, that's President Nelson's global leadership to affirm peace, justice, diversity, and pluralism. No, I didn't make that up, but seriously, it's what's on the announcement. Affirm peace, justice, diversity, and pluralism. All I can say is congratulations, President Nelson. Nice work. You enjoy that award. God only knows how many Mormons had to pay for it, but you enjoy that award. And I'm sure a lot of people will ooh and ah when they see it on the wall of your office. Rock on, President Nelson. Rock on.
I love RFM. He is hilarious. And I think he brings out so many good points. First of all, my experience with award-winning things is I won an award as an interior designer in a Street of Dreams, which I had to pay for everything that I put into that home. There was no builder there giving me any kind of cash or budget. So I had to pay for everything that I did to a couple of the rooms that I participated in, and I won an award. I had to pay for it. The second award that I won was my husband and I owned a foundation, and we collaborated with another nonprofit, and we donated a large amount of money to fulfill a project that this foundation had, and I received an award. So I love that he is referencing the fact that these don't come freely unless it's a Nobel Prize, which I don't even know all the details on that. There's usually some money involved. And the other thing that I thought was hilarious is doing some research on President Ezra Taft Benson and knowing the input that Gordon B. Hinckley had in working with the NAACP, and then seeing what Russell Nelson did with the NAACP. It's another example of the one-upness that is going on, this weird rivalry that's going on between these two prophets. And this is just another example. It's like, oh yeah, you shook hands, I got an award.
Well, if you think about Mandela, he spent 27 years in prison. What a sacrifice. If you think about Gandhi, he gave really his life for his beliefs. He was an incredible sacrifice. If you think about the other people who were named here, the Martin Luther King, again, he was assassinated. He put his life on the line. These are people who know what civil rights is all about. And to have Russell M. Nelson in the same category of these other incredible world faith leaders, that's a big surprise to me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why I said, give me the list of the things that you've done to bring peace and harmony between the communities.
Yeah, President Nelson, he also this last year, he experienced an unfortunate fall there. He wasn't able to participate in General Conference recently and in some of the other events. So he has recovered mostly. He is feeling better, but he is 99 years old. And his frail health is certainly affecting his ability to lead the worldwide faith.
As per many of the prophets that came before him. And so we are now going to be experiencing another weekend at Bernie's until Russell M. Nelson passes away. Yeah, we want more details. And the fact that he's 99, you have to put that in perspective as to his healing process, his capabilities. And he's amazing. I mean, he really is amazing for a 99-year-old, but the reality is he is 99. So you have to ask yourself, all right, who's in charge?
From his last General Conference, you can see that he had to pre-record his talk in the last General Conference because he was not feeling up to being there. He had to record it from a sitting position. And this is probably his most important address of the year, in my opinion, was the October 2023 General Conference, in which we got the surprising we got a couple things from it. I think we got three things. Number one, his hashtag of Think Celestial began to go global based on this. Do you remember that one?
Oh, it was so set up. I mean, Etsy had it. People were doing their wood carving jigsaw Christmas decorations with just Think Celestial before conference was even over. It's just so set up.
Rene, I got a Think Celestial tattoo as soon as I got this, as soon as I heard this. Now, is your podcast G-rated, or I could show it to you? I just need a caveat here.
No, you're safe. You're good. I want to see this.
That's maybe next time. Okay, maybe next time. We also got we also got from this one, never take counsel from those who don't believe in me. And that was another surprising message from him. And that really also caused a great deal of controversy.
Yeah, that was very remarkable. And it just solidified my feelings, and these are my own personal cynical feelings, that there have been many other prophets that preceded him that have a little bit of a God complex. But I think if you want to do a rivalry, Nelson, I think you do win this award.
Yeah, and the final thing that came from his talk, his three most important things from this talk, is a long-lost, weird Mormon doctrine, which he seemingly, pun intended, resurrected. Let's hear what he said in this last conference.
Did Russell M. Nelson just confirm a long-lost LDS doctrine that came from the days of Joseph Fielding Smith?
Your choices today will determine three things: where you will live throughout all eternity, the kind of body with which you will be resurrected, and those with whom you will live forever. If we unwisely choose to live telestial laws now, We are choosing to be resurrected with a telestial body.
Okay, hold up. Russell M. Nelson has just resurrected the telestial Ken doll doctrine, that those who go to the telestial kingdom do not have reproductive organs. Not only is this in direct contradiction to Alma 40:23, every limb and joint shall be restored to its body, yea, even a hair of the head shall not be lost, but all things shall be restored to their proper and perfect frame. It's also just plain weird. I'm confident that this is what he was referring to when he said,
A telestial body.
Rene, the telestial body is back. This is like a 50-year-old lost weird Mormon doctrine, but he's doubling down on it.
Yeah, exactly. I just, especially because this was recorded, you would think that there would have been an opportunity for them to go, stop, cut, let's talk about this. Where's this going to go? How's this going to play out in the PR area of our church? It's one of those things where there's got to be people pulling out their hair going, he did not just say that, but this was recorded. They could have stopped this. Maybe not, but it's absolutely absurd. And it goes back to the whole, the thing is, there's a string of events that goes with the celestial body. Like, why do you need sexual organs in the celestial kingdom? Are we going to go back to the reproducing spirit babies idea? Because I thought we were trying to get rid of that. So now that's just taken us back 50 years too.
Well, all I can say is I think I have a telestial body now. So that's my entire problem.
Get your wife in here. We're gonna continue this conversation.
I think that's my entire problem all along. But no, to sum up President Nelson from this year, first of all, he did absolutely no media interview. He did not do one interview with anyone of any substance who could have asked him any question whatsoever. He only left Utah one time the entire year. Utah only. He went to the Washington, D.C. temple. He dedicated it over a weekend, and that's the only time that he left the Beehive State. He donated his journals to the University of Utah. He embarked on a temple building spree, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, and he also fell and recovered. Is there any last thoughts on President Nelson's impact to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 2023, Rene?
My prayer is that I live long enough for those diaries to be revealed and for the wonderful historians in the church to start, pulling the veil off the truth and finding. I can't imagine. Now, I understand I'm not a cardiac surgeon and I'm not the prophet of a very large organ, but I can't imagine donating my diaries. Dear diary, today I took my 4 children to the zoo. I mean, what is in those diaries that is so important that you donate them to a university in this day and age?
That's you ask all of the right questions, and I have none of the right answers. Now, you can find us. We release a Mormon News Roundup on Instagram, and we're also on TikTok. Let us know your thoughts about President Nelson and what's in his diaries and what you think his global impact was. We'd be very grateful for that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, President Nelson, he was involved in a huge global temple building spree. So, hey, wait, how did that get in there? I'm sorry. I apologize.
My eyes.
I don't know how that got on the screen. I'm so sorry. So I was just gonna have to skip past that one. I apologize there, Rene. I do a lot of trolling, as you might imagine. So the first general conference, he announced 15 new houses of the Lord, and the second general conference of the year this year, he announced 20. So that's 35 total temple announcements, and they're very, very expensive. That is a huge amount of temples. From the church has announced a total of, I think it's around 340 total temple announced. And out of those, President Nelson, I believe, is responsible for about 180 of them by himself. Mm-hmm. So yeah, temples, they're always a big deal. What do you think about the temple building spree that we're seeing from President Nelson's administration?
I think, again, it goes into the rivalry that he has with Gordon B. Hinckley. And I also believe it's also part of the real estate thing. It's more about purchasing the land and being able to own the land with tax exemptions than it is about building a building where sacred covenants can be made, especially when the sacred covenants are being changed constantly. So I just think it's a ruse, really, for real estate purchases.
The temple ruse, we've heard of that one before, and the church just this year, there was a milestone where they dedicated 3 temples in only one single day. I mean, we're really starting to see a huge amount of temples that are being constructed. And from the leaked documents that we heard this year, the New Mormon Temple in Idaho, which was a 70,000 square foot temple, which is maybe a slightly larger than normal temple. It's not incredibly large, but it is slightly larger than normal. Its limestone flooring was quarried in Bethlehem, and the wood for its doors was imported from the Congo. It cost $69 million to construct, and it's just one part of the global spending spree. So if you do the math here, if each temple is, say, around $50 to $60 million, because this one is slightly larger than normal, each of these two general conferences, President Nelson announced about $1 billion in global temple allocations. I mean, $2 billion of temples, that is just a huge amount of money.
Yeah, it's an outrageous amount of money, especially now that they've kind of gone into the, mobile home version of the temples where they're pre-constructed. They tried to put off this image that they were going to these smaller temples to save money. And that gave everybody the impression that it really was about the covenants that are performed inside the temple and not so much about the building itself. But now it's almost like they've done a 180 and they're going back to these huge, large and spacious buildings. So I'm confused.
Last article from the Idaho Temple, I believe it's the Pocatello, Idaho. It was from the Wall Street Journal. That's solid reporting of the $69 million. And the Wall Street Journal asked the presiding bishop, who is a Bishop Kaze, they said, oh, this is the natural question that people have. Why in the world are we spending so much money on these edifices? And his answer, Bishop Kaze's answer, is very instructive. Can you read that for us, Rene?
Yeah. We have a vision of the church that is, can I use the word grandiose? Said Gerald Kaze, the church's presiding bishop, in an interview, because we believe the gospel has to be taken to all the world. And so we see the size of the church multiple times what it is now in the future.
How do you feel about a grandiose vision of the church where billions and tens of billions of dollars are not spent on the poor, not spent on church members, not spent on the things that Jesus espoused, but instead are built on these incredibly large structures?
It's so confusing to me because in this day and age with the social media and the ability to hunt down facts, you would think there would be more awareness of the transparency. So the fact that they just purchased Times Square basically for the season to advertise, Christmas and bringing back Jesus is another example of this idea that the bigger you are, the better you are. And I think that's a concept that is no longer true in today's world. People don't see it that way. This is not a 1960s marketing plan that's going to work in 2023 or 2024. I think most people can see through this facade.
Yeah, it all comes back to that grandiose vision. Bishop Kaze presumably gets his marching instructions from President Nelson. President Nelson has a grandiose vision of the church in which the church is going to own hundreds of billions of dollars worth of temples and real estate and in investment properties in Ensign Peak and other things. That's the grandiose vision. The grandiose vision is not for the stone to be cut out of the mountain without hands and for it to roll forth and fill the whole earth and that everyone in the world is going to be a Mormon, because they know that that is not going to happen. So the grandiose vision now needs to be shifted from individual membership to structures, to big, gaudy, grandiose edifices.
Right. And I think that plays into what we talked about when we're talking about dealing with a 99-year-old. The idea that a Gentile is going to be driving down the road, he's going to see this beautiful, grandiose building and say to himself, I want to know more about what goes on in that building. I'm going to contact the missionaries and start having the discussions, because whatever's going on there, it must be amazing because that building is so large and spacious. I just don't think that's the way it works.
Oh, and that's the thing, is that people can Google what happens on the inside of the building, and what when they watch the New Name Noah hidden camera videos, it kind of the temples kind of lose their mystique. But speaking of what you said about Gentiles, when the church is putting in these massive structures into mostly quote unquote Gentile communities, which is non-member communities, or as the church's preferred term, members of other faith communities, like in Heber Valley, well, it's having an incredibly conflicted response, both in Heber Valley, which is in Utah, and also in Cody, Wyoming. LDS Temple has been involved with 4 lawsuits there. The church is getting sued left, right, and center with these temples, and they're really getting an icy reception in a lot of these communities.
Yeah, this is really sad. As I mentioned, if you're looking at it, especially from a PR point of view, or even from the missionary point of view, it reminds me so much of what happened in Missouri. As you mentioned, Clay County and Caldwell County, where the state of Missouri was trying to work within the laws and trying to work with the Mormons and trying to allow them to do what they wanted to do, but they refused to follow the law. And that's what got them into trouble. And you see the exact same thing happening. Polygamy was illegal. Taking over other people's property, it was illegal. And so, but they try to change the laws, which they're doing in Wyoming. They're literally changing the laws so that they can do what they want to because they have enough money to do that. So it's just history repeating itself. And I think, again, nowadays, we've gotten past the persecution whitewashing that was done that we were all told growing up. And we realize now we know historical facts and we know, no, you were part of the problem. This was not just a persecution. And that's what's going to happen in Wyoming. And as I've heard with all of the things that came up with the boards and the committees and the people having a chance, people use their testimony of the truthfulness of the gospel to justify building this building, which is the largest building that I think they even have there. That was their justification. We know the church is true, therefore we can build whatever we want. That can't be a good thing for missionary work.
It's not going to win a lot of hearts and minds. It's not going to influence, what is that old book, How to Win Friends and Influence People? It's not going to accomplish, I think, what the church wants to accomplish in these areas. But really, it's the grandiose mission. The church really does not care. It's not about building friends, influencing people, and soft power. The church frequently and more frequently results in hard power. That is, we're going to sue you. We're going to ruin your small town because we're going to put you through so much federal litigation that we're going to bankrupt your small town because we got Ensign Peak and we can afford it and we're going to win in the long run. The church is going to try to push its way through to accomplish its grandiose mission.
I think it's going to play out. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Wyoming and Heber because I think there is so community outrage. So it's going to be an interesting thing to watch in 2024.
Yeah, we'll be watching here on the Mormon News Roundup, and I know you'll be following it as well on She Became Visible. Now, our next number 7 article for the year is kind of a 2-for-1 here. It's really had a lot of hits on it, and it's Jody Hildebrandt and Ruby Frankie. And if you're not familiar with those names, we're going to bring you up to speed on those. First of all, Rene, who is Jody Hildebrandt and Ruby Frankie? Who are those guys?
For mothers and members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, this story to me was a big one. This took precedence over all the other ones that we've covered so far, just because the idea of child abuse and even breaking up families is so horrendous. And again, this is going to play out in 2024. So we're going to be keeping our eye on this. But I didn't follow Ruby Frankie when she was doing her 8-passenger YouTube. I'm past that stage. My kids are grown and gone. But my daughters who have young children, they did follow her. And so it was a real eye-opener for me to go back and watch some of the YouTubes that she had on there, and then to hear about the abuse that was going on. And the problem is, and I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this, but when you listen to Jody Hildebrandt and her ideas, her concepts, and her business that was called Connections, she used the word truth a lot. She used the term, well, that's just the truth. So whether you like it or not, that's just the truth. And unfortunately, she was repeating the message that Russell M. Nelson gave at conference a couple of years ago, where he said, I know a lot of people, prophets aren't real popular around people, but it's just the truth. So when you start repeating words like that and you know where that concept comes from, that's really scary.
Yeah, I had a Bryce Blegenagel on our podcast when these accusations were becoming more common, and he said that the Connections Academy, which they founded, was basically a Mormon influence cult. I mean, some very harmful ideology here. Let me play one thing because this really went viral. This wasn't just on the St. George Spectrum in Utah. This wasn't local. This was on E-News. This really got a lot of hits. And Ruby Frankie, she's been arrested for her incredibly harmful parenting styles and her neglect and just her bizarre mindset. She's currently in jail. Let's bring you up to speed on this.
Influencer Ruby Frankie has officially been charged with 6 counts.
Latter-day Saints. Is just this a coincidence that they happen to be Mormons? What do you think?
No, I think it's exactly what I said. There's such an influence in this idea that there is a truthfulness that cannot be disputed. And they took it one step. I mean, as we're going to find out as the trial begins, Jody has some major mental issues, and her niece, revealed a lot of those issues, but she had the backing financially and professionally from the church. Her clients came from members of different congregations, and a lot of them were paid for by tithe-paying members of the church. The concepts, the fact that they were accepted was because a lot of the concepts came from teachings in the church. Now, obviously, you can take a concept and turn it around backwards and frontwards, and that's what Jody did. But the fact that she was supported by the church is where there starts to get some really sticky issues.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a really, really messed up case, and it's just amazing that these people, they're going to church every day, and what you see on the outside from those clips, you see a happy, shiny, wonderful. It's kind of like shiny, happy people, the typical Mormon family,
Right.
white and delightsome.
Right.
Everybody's having a good time. Underneath, there's an incredibly sinister interior in which she was abusing her children. In fact, she was eventually arrested on 6 felony counts of child abuse after her son was discovered with open wounds and duct tape on his ankles and his wrists. He escaped to the neighbor's house, and luckily for him, the police were able to intervene. But this is just, how do these things happen in these Mormon communities time and time again? I mean, we have the ministering program. People are supposed to be going into the home. They're in church every single Sunday. How does nobody ever seem to catch on to what is happening until it is too late?
That's a perfect example, D-Base, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because I just listened to another podcast by faithful members of the church who were claiming that the church, because of its protocol, is the safest place for your children. This particular host actually said, we're all parents. We drop our kids off 3 times a week. We're not worried about any kind of abuse going on because of the way the church is set up, there's many, many eyes. And I thought, how delusional are you? In every one of these abuse cases, where were the visiting teachers, the ministering brothers, the relief society, the primary workers? Where were all of these eyes for these particular children? And my heart breaks so much for these children. And I wish and I hope that there will be programs set up for these, especially these 2 younger ones, that will help them have successful lives from this point on. It's horrendous.
Absolutely. And, Jody Hildebrand, her counseling license has now been frozen amid these child abuse charges. And they face a lot of abuse charges. And we've seen that from this particular case in Utah, they're going to start thinking about changing the licensing requirements for these so-called life coaches, because it's basically a Wild West in the state of Utah. Anyone can be a life coach, and that brings along with it an air of credibility. And obviously, in this case, there's no credibility. The Connections Academy and the other things that these folks were associated were diabolical and evil. And from your channel, I've watched so much of your content of the amount of love that you've given to your children. That's one of the most inspiring parts about She Became Visible, is your connection with your children and the guests that you have on being a mother, being a parent, seeing these LDS parents who are supposed to be, the children are supposed to be the sheep of the flock that we're supposed to be taking care of. And to see them abused in this way, I know that it troubles you to no end.
It really does. And I really hope that this little boy is given the hero worship that he deserves for saving his little sister and himself. And again, I hope that there are moves that are made, setting up programs, setting up whatever, to make sure that this little boy and his sister have a chance for very successful adult lives after this horrendous torture. It's the saddest thing ever.
Yeah, it is. Now, speaking of other legal things that are happening, we're on to number 6 here. And this is the James Huntsman tithing lawsuit. And if you're familiar with that, James Huntsman is the son of the famous Utah governor, right? Or maybe he's the nephew. I don't know. Part of the Huntsman brand in Utah is a very powerful family, right? I believe he's the son of the former governor.
Right.
And you wonder, well, what is happening with this lawsuit? Because this lawsuit was filed way back in, I believe it was 2019. So what is it doing in 2023 as a number 6 Mormon story? There's a lot of interesting twists and turns that are happening with this lawsuit. And the first of which is that the judge initially tossed Huntsman's tithing fraud lawsuit against the LDS Church. So Huntsman is saying that he paid tithing to the church under the auspice that money would be used for charity. And the lawsuit alleges that the church did not use it for charity, and in fact used it for a number of commercial purposes, including the buying of the City Creek Mall and the bailing out of Deseret Mutual Benefit insurance company, which the church owns. So let's get the first update from this year, which is Huntsman initially losing the fraud lawsuit.
Federal judge has dismissed James Huntsman's high-profile lawsuit against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints alleging fraud in tithing. Today, Judge Stephen Wilson rejected all of Huntsman's claims. Huntsman sued the church, alleging it misspent tithing money he donated, saying the money was misspent to fund the posh City Creek Center project in downtown Salt Lake City. The church, however, has denied it. The judge also rejected the Latter-day Saint Church's assertion that the First Amendment barred Huntsman from bringing his lawsuit in the first place.
I'm sad that it was thrown out, but I'm just absolutely thrilled that it's been revived.
After it was thrown out at the district level, which is this lawsuit was filed in California, Huntsman appealed it. And at the district level, the appeals court reinstated the lawsuit for the return of the tithing that he paid as a Latter-day Saint. I believe it was around $3 million in tithing. So the district court said no, but the circuit court or the appeals court said yes. And they sent it back, and it's back on. And that's why I want to play this next one, is that a federal appeals court has reinstated it. Let me play this for you.
News now, a federal appeals court reinstates a fraud lawsuit against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The Ninth Circuit sided with James Huntsman, brother of former Governor John Huntsman, on part of his lawsuit against the church, claiming it misused members' tithes to cover business ventures. He alleges that money was spent to develop the City Creek Center and bail out a life insurance company instead of supporting charitable causes. The church, for its part, has denied all wrongdoing, but the Ninth Circuit on Monday saying the claim about the City Creek Center could have merit and sent it back to a district court.
So the lawsuit has been put back in because the appeals court, 2 out of the 3 judges in the appeals court, said that a reasonable juror could conclude that President Hinckley's statements in particular, and some other senior church leaders' statements, when they said that no tithing would be used for the building of the City Creek Mall, that a reasonable juror could conclude that those statements were fraudulent. That's why the appeals court sent it back down to the district court.
Exactly. And I think that's so important to recognize that the word salad can only go so far, and the deception can only go so far. And I'm just thrilled that this is going to be opened up and that perhaps there can be some changes made.
The district court said no. Huntsman appealed to the circuit court. The circuit court said yes, but the church has appealed that again and says it wants the circuit court again to review Huntsman's lawsuit decision. So instead of being sent back down to the district court, it's being reviewed this time by the full panel in the circuit court. This is going to be a years-long operation. A lot of people are looking at this with with high anticipation, because there's just so many members that thought that they were paying tithing, making donations, doing fast offerings, and that money would be spent for mostly charitable purposes. I think a lot of us thought, there's going to be some church overhead. There's going to be some, some of that money's going to go to BYU. We understand that, but we thought that the vast majority, James Huntsman and the rest of us thought that the vast majority of what we used, what we donate to the church would be used for good and not in commercial purposes, because we believed when President Hinckley said that no tithing would be used for the City Creek Mall. We believed him. And that's what the core of this lawsuit is about. It's about fraudulent statements from church leaders.
Exactly. And I think it's so important to use this as an example of that there has to be, one of the beautiful things about the United States is we are supposed to be set up with no privilege, that the law is the law for everyone, whether you're rich or whether you're poor. If you commit a crime, you should be punished on the same level. And I can't imagine how people can justify, for example, again, my husband and I owned a foundation. People would make very large donations in expectation that we're going to use that money for the purpose that we stated in our mission statement. And if I would have taken that money and bought myself a brand new Lamborghini or a new car or an extravagant trip of some kind, I would have been held responsible, and I would have had legal ramifications for that. So the fact that they can do this is so disheartening for people. And I'm hoping that it maybe curtails some donations.
Well, the most amazing thing about religions, the difference between some nonprofits and religions, is religions can do almost anything with those tithing donations whatsoever. Yeah, you can put it into the pastor's car. You can put it into his jet. That's why we have some of these mega Joel Osteen and some of these other big guys. They're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So the church can do almost anything with the tithing. But what it can't do, this is what the circuit court said. What it can't do with tithing is to say, we're not going to use your donation for this. And then use your donation for this. That you cannot do. If Hinckley had just kept his mouth shut about the City Creek Mall, James Huntsman would not have a leg to stand on, because the church can do whatever it wants with the donations except commit fraud. That's what it can't do.
Loose lips sink ships, right?
Yeah, they certainly can. I'm sure that a lot of the church lawyers today are kicking themselves over the statements from Bishop Budge, from President Hinckley, and other senior church leaders. There's approximately 5 or 6 of them that talk about the City Creek Mall, assuring members that don't worry, your tithing is not going towards this. Instead, invested reserves are going towards the City Creek Mall. The problem is that invested reserves are basically tithing to begin with. There's a very small difference in between invested reserves and tithing, and that's what the heart of the lawsuit says.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, our number 5 article here is Lori Vallow. This is, again, a lot of news followed Lori Vallow, her trial and her sentence on committing murder, multiple counts of murder, murdering her 2 children, Kylie and JJ, in Idaho, along with Chad Daybell, who you see in the picture there. This is the biggest bombshells from it. She was 49 years old, was convicted of murdering her 2 sons and conspiring to kill her husband's first wife. And that's not even all of the murder charges that she's facing, but this was a national story. Lori Vallow, she was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So was Chad Daybell. They were in the temple frequently right up before they were arrested. This is a huge Mormon story of the year. It's our number 5 story, Rene.
Yeah, this is really huge. And this is truly one of these situations that did go viral and did go worldwide. And as I watched a lot of the Lori Vallow case, and then I know that, through the algorithms, other YouTubes would be referred to me. And all of a sudden I'm watching people I've never even heard of follow this case with hundreds and thousands of followers and subscribers. But it was absolutely devastating. And I do think this is going to be a little bit of a hurt, a little bit of a for the church, just because even in her testimony before she was sentenced, she used a scripture to try to validate what she did. And the fact that I was a little bit disappointed that her trial in Arizona now is going to be televised, because I was so excited that she was going to be brought back to Arizona. And I thought, well, that's where I'm going to be for the next 6 months. I'm going to be in court somewhere. But now, we don't need to do that because we can all watch it on TV. But yeah, between her trial in Arizona and Chad's trial in Idaho, it's going to be a big one for 2024. And it's going to be interesting to see how the church and Visions of Glory and other references are going to be called out.
Let's listen to her and see her reaction when the verdict was read that she was going to be found guilty, life without the possibility of parole.
In the District Court of the 7th Judicial District of the State of Idaho, in and for the County of Fremont, State of Idaho plaintiff versus Lori Noreen Vallow, aka Lori Noreen Daybell, defendant, is Lori Noreen Vallow not guilty or guilty of first-degree murder of Kylie Ryan? Answer: guilty. Is Lori Noreen Vallow not guilty or guilty of first-degree murder of Joshua Jackson Vallow? Answer: guilty.
The only portion of this trial that was actually televised was the verdict. And that's why there was certainly a media circus that went along with this. I mean, it really dominated for about a month through the entire process. Chad Daybell, he is going to be facing charges. He wasn't part of this. But as you said, now that she's been extradited to Arizona and that the court is going to be in there every single day, we're going to see a feeding frenzy, a fiasco. We're going to see an O.J. Simpson level of coverage of her new trial in Arizona, which is where she's facing the charges for conspiring to kill her brother, Alex, her brother, Alex.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're exactly right. It's going to bring back the memories of me when I used to watch the O.J. Simpson trial. And I think I'm going to have to invest in a lot of popcorn and perhaps some more free weights, because I'm not going to be leaving my television for all of 2024.
and that's what really drives eyeballs is people. The true crime genre is a huge genre. You know, people want to look at people with weird religions, weird cult-like things really go viral. And she's kind of like a cult within a cult with her entire persona, the Visions of Glory, the her bizarre beliefs. People like to see those put on display. So we're going to see even more eyeballs. This is going to be another huge story in this next year as well.
It's going to be interesting to see if any of her friends are going to be implemented in any of this, because I remember when I was watching this last year and they're interviewing Melanie and they're interviewing her sister-in-law. And I was like, why haven't you guys been charged with something? You were participating in a seance-like group prayer thing. You knew what was going on. So it's going to be interesting to see if any other people get dragged into this. It's going to go on for a few years.
It definitely is. And also in Arizona, there's something must be in the water because there's a lot of unfortunate things that are happening in Mormon news in Arizona. We saw from this last year, the Arizona sex abuse case that was brought to us by Michael Resendez, which is a name you might recognize, right, Renee? Who is Michael Resendez?
Yeah, absolutely. He is the reporter that covered and kind of broke the Catholic sex abuse that was going on. And I love that he was just absolutely worshiped and awarded for what he did for the Catholic Church. But now the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they think he's gone too far. They think that his success has gone to his head. And so now he's just picking at straws to find other cases. And it's just like, wow.
So he was the one who shined the light on the Catholic Church's abuses in New England, in particular. I believe it was in the mid 1990s, and it spawned that documentary Floodlit, which really went global. Now he's taking that same flashlight that he found with the Catholic Church. He's pointing it right at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And what he found is highly disturbing, especially in the Arizona case. So there was a horrible case a couple of years ago where Paul Adams, who was a member of the church, he abused both of his daughters, sexually abused them for a number of years. Mr. Adams reported the sexual abuse to his bishops. Those bishops did not report the ongoing child abuse to authorities. Paul Adams, eventually, he was found out because he posted his disgusting videos on the internet. They traced it down. They tracked him down. They found him. They arrested him. He committed suicide in jail. His wife, Mrs. Adams, ended up going into jail for 2.5 years as part of the process. But the most incredible thing here is this is from this year. Arizona court upheld the clergy privilege in the child abuse case. So what happened is that the attorneys that were representing the survivors of these two little girls, they sued the church and said, these bishops knew that Mr. Adams was abusing these girls and he should have reported it. This was taken to litigation and went all the way to the Arizona Supreme Court, where the so-called clergy penitent privilege was upheld. And the Arizona court said that the Mormon Church did nothing wrong in this case.
Yeah, it was absolutely disgusting. And especially when the lawyer pointed out after the case had been dismissed again, was that if one of the first bishops that he reported this to, if they would have reported it to authorities, then he would have been taken out of the home. And the second child, who had not even been born yet, who was then abused at 6 weeks old, would have been prevented if the crime would have been reported. It's just another example of secrecy, and it doesn't work. Secrets do not protect or prevent crimes from happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was two parts from this year. The second part from this year is first it went to the Supreme Court, where it was challenged saying, is the priest penitent privilege or clergy penitent privilege, is it legal and lawful? And the Arizona Supreme Court said, yes, that's a law in the books and that it's legal and lawful for those bishops to not report the sexual abuse. Then it went back down as a result of that. And the court, the Superior Court or the Circuit Court, based upon the Supreme Court's ruling, said, now we're going to uphold the initial case on this, saying that the clergy privilege in the child abuse case is being upheld, which means that these two girls are basically left with nothing. Now, their lawyers are saying that they're going to appeal this ruling, but this has put a chill on this particular case, and it's going to be a huge uphill struggle for these girls to get any type of justice. But this was covered very significantly during the year because Michael Resendez, he knows his facts. He's a very well-respected journalist. He's not just picking a bone with the church because he's some kind of a disgruntled anti-Mormon critic. He has the bona fides, he has the background, and his due diligence and reporting is all documented. And this has just shined a horrible light on the church. And it's a very unfortunate, mostly an end to this particular case in your neck of the woods.
Right. And I think I'd have to have somebody that's a lawyer or an expert in this field confirm this, but I think there's a confusion that people don't understand between legally responsible or illegal to report. And I think that's where the problem is, a lot of people that are defending the church in this case are saying, well, it was, he could not report it because of the clergy penitence idea. And it's like, no. He didn't have to report it, but he could have reported it. So I think that's where there's some misunderstanding that this poor guy's hands or both guys' hands were tied and that there wasn't anything they could do. And I just don't know how they slept at night. I don't know how they went to church every Sunday and knew what was going on and could live with themselves. It's amazing.
And this is what Michael Resendez pointed out, is that these bishops, who are generally lay clergy members, they don't know the ins and outs of all sexual abuse law, which is understandable. They called the church's helpline, which is supposed to be specifically for bishops, to find out what their legal obligations are. And according to the documents that Michael Resendez brought to us, the church helpline, which was eventually routed to Curtin McConkie lawyers, told these bishops, do not report the abuse to police. And they followed that advice. Now, Arizona is a you can report if you want to state.
Right.
So they wouldn't have been in any personal legal jeopardy if they had reported, but they were company men. Bishops usually are. They're loyal to the church. And when the church's law firm says, do not report, they follow their marching orders.
Yeah, exactly. There is such an ideal that people in the church have that this power and authority is actually a legal structure in the entire world, and that these men actually have the power to take away your salvation, take away your family relations, that they actually have that much power. And so the idea that you didn't do something because somebody in Utah told you not to, and that was a legal procedure, is so a perfect example of this inflated power that these priesthood holders have.
And see, when this case has basically been resolved now, it's going to be appealed, but the appeal is going to be years in the making. And based upon the Arizona Supreme Court saying that the clergy penitent privilege has been upheld, it's going to be very difficult to get any justice for these two girls. And the church released a statement regarding, this was just last month in November, released a statement regarding how they felt about the final conclusion, about the tentative final conclusion of this case. Could you read the church's spokesperson and what he said?
Yeah. Bill Maldon, the church's attorney who handled the case, said in a statement to the Deseret News, "We are pleased with the Arizona Superior Court's decision granting summary judgment for the church and its clergy and dismissing the plaintiff's claims. Contrary to some news reports and exaggerated allegations, the court found that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and its clergy handled this matter consistent with Arizona law."
So, Rene, they're pleased about the outcome of how this situation unfolded.
Yeah, they followed the law. They followed the law in this example of sexual abuse to these little girls, but they changed the law in Wyoming to get their temple put in. I love how this law thing is just thrown around. You know, it's like, we don't like that law, we're going to change it. Oh, we're going to obey that law. We like that law. It's like, wow, this is fun.
Yeah. And that's what you can do when you have as much money as the church has. And they hired different law firms. So they had a different law firm that represents them in Arizona. They have a different one that represents them in the Wyoming. They have one different one for the James Huntsman lawsuit. And then they have the Kurt McConkie lawyers who answered the end of the line. The church is spending so much money on legal defense that they can afford to change the laws. The church, money really drives the laws in this country. It's a sad reality, is that the church also lobbied on behalf of the clergy penitent privilege in Utah and potentially in other locations, of saying, we want you to keep that around. So the church is spending money to keep the clergy penitent privilege alive. And that's why after the AP sex abuse happened last year in Utah, a number of lawmakers brought forth new bills and said, you know what, we need to get rid of the peace penitent privilege in the state of Utah. And the church threw a wet blanket on that, and it died in committee. Didn't even see the light of day.
Church and state. Yeah.
Number 3 and number 2 articles here, Rene, are combined. And it is really, you can't separate these two. It's Tim Ballard and M. Russell Ballard. They're really number 2 and number 3 and number 2, and I put them in there combined. So here we see Tim Ballard. He's now, who is Tim Ballard, Rene? Who is this guy?
Well, he's an idiot, but he has he is a perfect example of a charismatic man who was able to swindle hundreds and thousands of dollars out of good intentioned people, and absolutely amazing. And I love how facts are coming out now. He claimed that he was in the CIA. He claimed that he worked for
Homeland Security,
his Homeland Security job. And he made all of these claims, and everyone just drank it. They just sucked it in. And no one did any fact checking or vetting at all. They just trusted him. He looked good. He could have been in the musical Book of Mormon. He looked like a typical, like Jim Gaffigan says, I go to Utah and people say I look like a Mormon. And he's like, I didn't know you could look like a religion. It's a perfect example of, he looked it, he played the part, he folded his arms and bowed his head when it was appropriate. And he swindled hundreds and thousands of dollars out of really kind, good intentioned people.
And the way that he did that was he was the CEO of a supposed anti-sex trafficking organization known as Operation Underground Railroad, OUR. And this organization supposedly would go to far-flung locations and rescue children who were being sex trafficked. In fact, they made a movie about Tim Ballard last summer called The Sound of Freedom, which, he was a very famous Mormon at this point, and his organization supposedly rescued 7,000 children. It had a budget of tens of millions of dollars, and he was a hero in Mormon communities the world over. Even the church trotted his books out in Deseret Books, that he was on the church's website. He was mentioned in devotionals. You could find his talks in the BYU bookstore. He was the epitome of a masculine Mormon man, which is like the antithesis of the She Became Visible channel.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And, I think it's ironic too that people don't ask themselves. I think the biggest question, I was listening to Dr. Matt Harris, and one of the things he said he uses in his classroom, whenever one of his students brings something up, the first thing he asks them is ask yourself why. And that can start a complete discussion on the way things happen. So when I first heard about Tim Ballard, and I found out that he was doing a lot of his rescues in Haiti, Costa Rica, Mexico, all of these different countries, the first thing I asked was why? Why aren't you doing anything in Seattle, in Portland, in Arizona, in New Mexico, in all of the other states in the United States? Why do you have to go to Haiti to work against sex trafficking? And that, if you asked yourself that question, I think that would have led to a little bit more vetting, and it would have prevented a lot of these things from happening.
Yeah, allegedly, he reached out to the Elizabeth Smart Foundation, which also deals with women being trafficked. And Elizabeth Smart did her due diligence and said, I don't want to have anything to do with OUR or Tim Ballard at all. A lot of people who are in this industry, who work in this demographic, know a rat when they see one. And
Right.
The crazy thing is not only did he not allegedly rescue any children, and that he squandered the millions of dollars of donations that were given to him, among the worst part about it all is that he was sexually abusing the people who he was taking with him. He would take women with him as an underground kind of a sting operation. It became known as the couple's ruse. And he sexually groomed them. He sexually abused them. The allegations against Tim Ballard are absolutely stomach churning.
Yeah, and I'm so proud of these women that have come forth and been willing to risk their lives and their families' lives and their homes and their regular day in and day out activities to bring this all into the light. I'm so proud of them and what they're doing.
Now, eventually this came to church's knowledge that Tim Ballard was doing morally unacceptable activities. This is a church spokesperson who told Vice News that Ballard betrayed his friendship with a powerful leader who never authorized his name or the name of the church to be used for Tim's personal or financial interests. This was a bizarre article that came out on a Friday that had a lot of people scratching their head about the supposed connection between Tim Ballard and a senior church leader. This really got the internet, especially the bloggernacle, buzzing.
It was amazing that the people listening and watching this didn't ask themselves why, but immediately ran to the defense of the church, saying that can't be true. This is false news. This has got to be fake because that's not how the church does things. And again, you have to just sit back and ask yourself, let me question that a little bit.
We eventually found out who the leader was, and that the leader was M. Russell Ballard, who we're going to fill you in on him in just a moment. But eventually, Tim Ballard, he ended up getting sued over the sexual improprieties. He's being criminally investigated in Linden. He's also being he has criminal charges that are pending against him and Sean Reyes. This entire debacle has completely blown up. And the craziest part about all of this isn't some rogue church member who was just off on his own doing something evil. The allegation here is that his activities, especially his rescue missions, especially bringing in other donors, it was all blessed off by the Mormon power structure, including what we see here. We see Tim Ballard on the right. We have Glenn Beck, who's another powerful conservative Mormon who has his own radio program, the Blaze Network. He has his own radio show. And also M. Russell Ballard allegedly was an investor in the OUR organization, was allegedly profiting off of these supposed rescues. And he was the one who was giving the green light to all of the activities. That's the part that's really diabolical.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I know you're going to highlight the death of M. Russell Ballard, and And because of that, the truth is coming out even more about M. Russell Ballard's life in general and the kind of sketchy people that he's been getting himself involved in his whole life. And so it kind of tells the full story of how he might have gotten involved with Tim Ballard, because this is something that's kind of par for the course for him. And another example of whitewashed things being portrayed and us unknowingly and willingly trusting our authorities because they claim to be called of God.
Lynn Packer, who's done a lot of great reporting on M. Russell Ballard, just released at the beginning of December another 1.5 hour hit piece. I don't know, a journalistic piece which details M. Russell Ballard's history of incredibly shady financial dealings and failed business ventures. And this looks like this is par for the course. This is a long line of M. Russell Ballard's really, I don't know, nefarious investment schemes. And as you mentioned, yeah, M. Russell Ballard, he did just die here on November 12th, 2023. He was the acting president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who the allegations in the lawsuit say blessed off on this entire thing. And that's calling into question. The church is supposed to be there to protect people from scams. And it seems like senior church leaders are perpetuating an individual who has now been credibly accused by multiple women, multiple accusations of sexual perversion and assault and harassment, and now grifting and wasting hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of donations and of not rescuing anyone. And M. Russell Ballard appears to have been propping him up in the Mormon public eye. And people are saying, why didn't he know that this was a grifter when so many people like Elizabeth Smart and other people said, I'm not going to touch this guy with a 10-foot pole?
Yeah. And I think the sad part about this, and a perfect example, is because we have news available 24/7 and immediately after something happens, the fact that M. Russell Ballard's funeral was broadcast, we could watch the funeral, we could listen to the tributes that were given to him, and Jeffrey R. Holland's tribute that he gave to his friend. I'm sure they were really good friends. It was a lie. The things that he said in tribute to this man were lies. But if you were a believing member and could not use any kind of critical thinking, you would have listened to Jeffrey Holland's eulogy, and then you would listen to Lynn Packard's new broadcast that he just did on YouTube with facts and documents and everything backing it up. Now, who would you say was the liar? Lynn Packard or Jeffrey Holland? And that's the sad, scary truth. If you don't have any way to use any kind of critical thinking, and you're going to continue to listen to this whitewashing, that's how people like Tim Ballard are able to do the things that they do. It's so scary.
And the other way that Tim Ballard is able to do the things that he does is when President Ballard gave Mormon tithing records to wealthy Mormons in order to connect those two together. So the allegation here, actually, let me just play this for you, because Russell Brunson, who is a Mormon millionaire, claims that President Ballard called him on the phone and told him that he needs to donate to Tim Ballard. So we're using an ecclesiastical office specifically as the acting president of the Quorum of the 12 to say, I want you as a faithful Latter-day Saint to give money to Tim Ballard. And it turns out that that money was probably not being used for any child rescues. And along the way, a lot of women and other people were getting absolutely brutalized.
One of the most prominent leaders in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is accused of violating church policy by sharing members' tithing records. Elder M. Russell Ballard is acting president of the church's Quorum of the 12. The accusation is part of a lawsuit filed by 5 women against Operation Underground Railroad and its former CEO, Tim Ballard. Tim Ballard is not related to President Ballard. The lawsuit states that Davis County investigators found out President Ballard and other, quote, authorities leaked the tithing records to OUR to help the nonprofit target wealthy donors. Tim Ballard says the accusation is not true. The lawsuit also accuses the church of continuing to promote OUR even after publicly condemning Tim Ballard earlier this year for, quote, morally unacceptable behavior. Today, the church told Fox 13 News they regard tithing records as sacred and keep them confidential. President Ballard has, quote, never released tithing records to Operation Underground Railroad or any other organization.
Okay, so this is the allegation here from Russell Brunson, who released the video on it. He said specifically that President Ballard called him up on the phone, said he needed to donate to Tim Ballard. That's in direct contradiction to what the church's statement is. Somebody is lying here. It's either the church or it's Russell Brunson.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, was it Russell Brunson that was also, Ballard asked him to contribute to his son's business as well? Or was it another, there was another very wealthy donor that was brought in? And
I don't know the answer to that.
yeah, I can't remember who exactly it was, but it was like, hey, we got this Tim Ballard guy. And oh, by the way, I also have a son that has a fabulous business that you should be donating to. I think that was, I don't remember all the details. So yeah.
And as you mentioned, President Ballard, he has since passed away. Just a short time after this happened, the prophet praised him as a man of conversion, commitment, and consecration. But his legacy is incredibly storied now based upon these allegations. And we have a new acting president of the Quorum of the 12 now. It's Jeffrey R. Holland, even though he was in a coma for 3 weeks prior to this funeral. And that he was in the hospital for 5 weeks. He has now taken up the role as the acting president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. So this has been a huge article for this year. The Tim Ballard stuff, it really goes global because, you know, people, they really feed on fringe, especially right-wing fringe, maniacal religious zealots.
Right.
And Tim Ballard is very famous from The Sound of Music, which was a big summer blockbuster. This is a very prominent member of the church who the allegations, you know, let's face it, the media, they love to talk about stealing money and grifting money from people. They love to talk about sexual abuse, sexual allegations. That turns a lot of eyeballs. And then the hypocrisy of President Ballard turning over the tithing records. This was like a triple whammy. This is just like a beating frenzy in the media. Any last thoughts on the Tim Ballard and Russell Ballard mess?
Well, I think it was kind of unfortunate of his passing, and I can't help but wonder if there wasn't some stress involved in his passing. I know he wasn't doing very well, but also the fact that Jeffrey R. Holland is in some kind of kidney problem. He's going through dialysis and, what, like you said, was in a coma. So yes, let's put him in charge. I mean, you look through the whole top 4 or 5 people that are kind of critically ill, and that's really scary that that's the people that are running this organization.
And I had John Larson on the program when we were talking about this, and he said he doesn't even know how much M. Russell Ballard was aware of this. He was 95 years old when he passed. So how much is he aware of his surroundings and what he's calling people and investing? He doesn't have the capability to do his due diligence. I'm not excusing it, but this is the entire problem with the gerontocracy, is that a lot of messes can happen, and this is a prime example of it. We're going to be following this on the Mormon News Roundup, and that does take us to our #1 article of the year. This was the biggest one here, and this was the Security and Exchange Commission fining the LDS Church $5 million. This was our #1 story this year. Technically, they fined the church $1 million, and they fined the church's investment arm, which is Ensign Peak Portfolio, $4 million. This was a absolutely huge story. And let me give you the best sum up that I can of it. This is a 1-minute sum up. And let me get your initial thoughts on the #1 story of the year.
The Mormon Church has just been fined $5 million by the SEC after they charged them with failing to file forms that would have disclosed the church's equity investments, and for instead filing forms for shell companies that obscured the church's portfolio and misstated Ensign Peak's control over the church's investment decisions. By going to great lengths to avoid disclosing the church's investments, the church has institutionally broken their own 12th article of faith, which states a belief in honoring, obeying, and sustaining the law.
Well, this was another example of the fallacy of thinking that just because it's done, it's okay to be done. I mean, as a mother of 6 children, I think I've heard every excuse. Well, so-and-so maybe do it. Well, so-and-so did it. Well, those people over here did it. I mean, that is the weakest excuse for doing something for over 20 years, by the way. And they always say, well, these men aren't perfect. I'm like, you know, that really doesn't cut it very far, because there's a difference between I accidentally pulled my car into the garage and you know, broke the garage door or hit the fire hydrant or something like that. That's a mistake. Filing illegal shell companies or organizing shell companies for over 20 years is not a mistake. It's intentional. And I think, again, it goes back to what are the people in power able to get away with that the average Joe citizen would not be able to get away with. And I've heard so many people say, well, other people have done that. Well, that's what corporations do. And there's got to be some differentiation between something that is set out by God and a contractual agreement between a couple of worldly corporations.
The basics of what happened here is that the federal government requires any organization or any person who has at least $100 million invested in the U.S. stock market to disclose that it has those type of assets in order so that the government can understand who the players in the market are. And
Right.
starting back in 1997, the church founded Ensign Peak, which is its investment arm. And it seeded it with about $7 billion at that time, which is over the threshold of the required reporting. But the church, instead of reporting like it was supposed to on what are called the 13F forms, which it's supposed to do quarterly, it hid those from the government for a number of years. In
Right.
about 2012, when the church started to realize that the jig was up, when people were starting to realize that the church had a lot of money, they created these fake shell companies and filed the 13F forms on behalf of those shell companies. But those shell companies were not managing anything, and the managers were not managing anything. It was still being held at Ensign Peak. So this entire thing was a charade in order that the church could conceal its wealth. And we realized from the interviews from the Wall Street Journal from Roger Clark, who was the head of Ensign Peak for a number of years, he has since retired, what the reason is that the church did that. Now we know because Roger Clark told the Wall Street Journal. He said, we never wanted to give people a reason not to donate to the church. And if members like James Huntsman or you or me knew how much the church had and that it was not doing anything meaningful with those assets, then donations might have been curtailed, and the church wanted to do everything in its power, whether it was legal, whether it was ethical, whether it was moral, to conceal the investment fund.
Yeah. And, I think the biggest problem is the SEC does not understand these shell companies were not secret, D-Base. They were sacred. And they just don't understand that. And if they could just understand how we understand that principle, there wouldn't have been a problem, right? I mean, it's all sacred. We don't need to discuss it because these guys that are in charge, they know more than we do, and we don't need to know.
Yeah, we're just the children and they are the adults in the room.
That's
And
exactly right.
there's a rules for thee and not for me. And what's amusing, or I guess ironic, is that, Bernie Madoff, the hedge fund manager who sequestered $20 billion, do you
Yep.
know what he also forged along the way? His 13F forms. Why
Yep.
did he do it that way? It's because he claimed that he was managing less than 100 million when he was really managing upwards of 15 billion. So the Mormon Church is here and Bernie Madoff is here. They're both forging the 13F forms repeatedly in an effort to hide their illicit activities. And this is where we get the charges from the church here, where the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was fined the $5 million, which is absolutely unprecedented for a church to be fined by the SEC. This almost literally never happens. And the amazing thing about the statement is that the church took no responsibility. And at the end of the statement, they say, we consider this matter to be closed.
That's just like your parents. We're not going to talk about it. You do it because I said so. And
Yeah.
children obey.
Yeah, in fact, this is the statement from the church itself. It says, we affirm our commitment to comply with the law, regret mistakes made, and now consider this matter closed. Boy, with no accountability whatsoever, no senior leader of the church took any questions. There was no ability for the members to say, hey, what went on here? So on the same day that the SEC fined the church, they issued the statement. They said they consider the matter closed. They didn't discuss it at general conference. The auditing department didn't bring it up. There's just no accountability here for the church engaging in decades-long fraudulent actions. And for me, really, this is the biggest news article of the year because it takes the church down from its ethical high horse. The church used to say, well, we've got the moral authority. We are God's representatives. We are Jesus's bosom friends. No, you don't have the moral authority anymore because you lost it in the SEC fine, and the fact that no one took any accountability. Bishop Causet took no accountability, President Nelson took no accountability, and President Ballard took no accountability. There has been no accountability on this, and this is still a huge issue for me and for a lot of other people.
Yeah, unfortunately. And one of my favorite movies, it was Too Big to Fail. And I see a lot of correlation here where we've got a business, a corporation that's too big to fail. They've got too much power. They've got too much money. I mean, go back and watch a documentary on the FBI and, J. Edgar Hoover. Too big to fail. Too many friends in high places with too much money, and it prevents legal things from being done. And that's what we're seeing now in this church.
Yeah, and this also went mainstream because it was picked up by 60 Minutes in the middle of the year. This is the title of the 60 Minutes article here is Mormon Whistleblower, Church's Investment Firm Masquerades as a charity, because Ensign Peak, according to the whistleblower, according to David Nielsen, has engaged in almost no charitable activities whatsoever. The money that goes into the investment fund, it does not come out for almost anything except for two things: the funding of the City Creek Mall and the bailing out of an insurance program. And this 60 Minutes program was absolutely enormous. Let me play this trailer for you, which is where we have the Bishop Waddell here, who's the second man in charge of the bishopric, being interviewed.
Every year, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints collects $7 billion in contributions from its 17 million members. The church has its own investment firm. But there are questions now about how millions of those dollars have been used by the famously private church.
What about, the idea that secrecy builds mistrust?
Mm-hmm. Well, we don't feel it's being secret. We feel it's being confidential.
What's the difference?
What is the difference, Rene, between secret and confidential? That's a fine line, isn't it?
Well, I actually appreciated Brother Waddell's comments because I've now adopted that. So, when the Amazon boxes arrive, I just put them in my closet. And if my husband asks me about it, I say, I really don't consider it a secret. I just consider it confidential. It's working for me too. I mean, I'm learning by their example. Like, we don't need to look at the statement from the credit card. That is confidential. It's not secret. So I think we should all adopt that principle. It makes sense. It's working for them.
That's very amusing. Now, we did cover this on the Mormon News Roundup. We covered it on the Mormonish podcast as well in great detail. In fact, episode 60 with Colby Reddish and Ryan McKnight. In my opinion, this is one of our best episodes. And I know this was covered on Mormonish podcast as well. Did you watch any of those? Did you follow?
I was riveted. I mean, it was just absolutely amazing. I love the work that Ryan and Colby now is just popping out all over the place. And, sunlight. You need sunlight.
Yeah, you definitely do. And the church issued another statement following the CBS report as well. And it says that it's unfortunate that the 60 Minutes sought to elevate a story based on unfounded allegations by a former employee who has a different view on how the church should manage its resources. Notice it didn't say anything that the person got it wrong or the 60 Minutes didn't get it wrong. They just said that it was based on unfounded allegations. They didn't say what the clarification is, because what 60 Minutes reported was extremely accurate. So if 60 Minutes got it wrong, then please tell us what it is that they got wrong. Instead, they just said that it was based off of unfounded allegations, but they didn't refute that it was true at all.
It goes back to what Nelson said in his last conference talk about not believing someone that doesn't believe the way you do. And, perfect example of, again, M. Russell Ballard's legacy being disputed by someone who's lying about what his legacy was. Well, who are you going to believe? It depends on where you're at. And so, but that's so dangerous. That's so dangerous. If you do any kind of history reflection and see how propaganda works, you've got to use some kind of critical thinking.
Just checking in. Are you thinking celestial, Rene? Just wanted to check in with you.
Well, I think that's probably subjective. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted to check in with you because thinking celestial is important, but I do want to get your feedback. This is the top 10 that I put together, ranked from number 1 to number 10. Did I get it right? Did I leave off an article? Is the order correct? What did you think? Did we do a good job? What do you think? I need your frank evaluation here.
I think we did a really good job because, as I said, this is ongoing. I mean, this is a breaking news every day. And from, we just got a few days left in the month of December before we're going to be hitting a new year. And there's already things coming out daily about what's going on. So I think we did a pretty good job covering it to date.
That's good. I really appreciate that. We release new episodes of the Mormon News Roundup every 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sunday. And we release new episodes of the Mormon Movie Reviews on Monday nights at 9:30. Rene, what do you got planned for She Became Visible? What can we expect to see from you in the next couple of weeks?
We're going to kind of broaden our audience and our demographics. I've got some fun people I'm going to be interviewing. We're going to get some humor into it. And I'm actually have a really fun guest that I have planned for the new year. I was actually mistaken. I was in a class and I had someone come up to me and they say, do you do these Instagram posts? And I knew exactly. And I said, no, that's my friend Lynn. And she also has a gray hair type Instagram. And so I'm going to have Lynn on. We're going to talk about the joy of being an old lady. So we're just going to kind of broaden the topics a little bit and speak to my demographic, which is women who have decided to stand up and say, hey, I have some value here and you want to listen to it. So that's where we're going for 2024.
Well, I can't wait. I'm a big fan of She Became Visible. I'll be watching every single episode. And in honor of you, I just want to let you know that I didn't use any hair dye for this particular broadcast.
Ooh, gotta see some sparkles coming in there. And you as well. I want to say thank you, because honestly, it is a ping pong. Just, trying to keep up with all of the Mormon news that's happening weekly and almost daily. So I love watching your show because it brings some humor in it. And if we can't laugh, then we can get really discouraged.
Okay, well, once again, thanks so much for joining us, and so long.
Okay, bye-bye.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.